welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. Journal entry number 1, Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel. If I disappear, this journal will explain everything. I need to document what's happening in this city before it's too late, before more people vanish without a trace. It began 3 weeks ago with an assignment that seemed routine. My editor at the Sentinel, Dan, called me into his office on a sweltering Tuesday morning. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the August heat, and the windows were foggy with condensation. I remember wiping sweat from my forehead as he slid a folder across his desk. "Church attendance piece," he said. "Normally I'd give this fluff to an intern, but there's something weird here, Maya. Right up your alley." I'd built a reputation for covering the strange underbelly of New Orleans. The stories too bizarre for the mainstream sections, but too persistent to ignore entirely. Haunted hotels, voodoo shops with unexplainable occurrences, disappearances in the bayou that defied logic. The stuff that brings in clicks but that nobody takes seriously. "What's weird about church attendance?" I asked, flipping through the printouts. Graphs showing steady increases at certain historic churches throughout the city. "Notice anything?" Dan tapped a yellowed fingernail on one chart. I studied the numbers. St. Louis Cathedral, St. Augustine, St. Mary's Assumption, Our Lady of Guadalupe, all showing dramatic spikes in attendance over the past 6 months. "People getting more religious?" I shrugged. "Look at the exit data," Dan said, flipping to another page. That's when I saw it. Entrance counts vastly outnumbered exit counts. According to these records, hundreds more people were entering these churches than were leaving them. "This has to be an error," I said. "That's what I thought. But 3 different interns have verified the data. People go in. Fewer come out. Way fewer." A chill ran down my spine despite the heat. "Where are they going?" "Side exits." "That's what you're going to find out," Dan said. "Talk to the priests, the parishioners, neighbors. Figure out why our historic churches seem to be collecting people." I left his office with that unsettling phrase echoing in my mind. Collecting people. That afternoon, I drove to St. Louis Cathedral in the French Quarter. The white towers stood stark against the blue sky, as they had for centuries. Tourists snapped photos in Jackson Square. Artists displayed their work along the fence, and street performers collected tips from the crowds. Everything seemed normal. I approached a street vendor selling bottles of water from a cooler. "Excuse me, have you noticed anything unusual about the cathedral lately?" The woman, mid-60s with deeply lined skin and bright red lipstick, glanced at the church and then back at me. "You with the city?" "Journalist," I clarified, showing my press badge. "Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel." She leaned closer. "They added more services. Used to be just mornings and evenings, now they got them all day. People go in all times. Real quiet when they come out, if they come out at all." "What do you mean, if they come out?" She shrugged. "Some folks, I see them go in day after day. Regular faces. Then one day, they go in and I don't see them no more." My phone buzzed in my pocket. An emergency alert. The harsh tone made both of us jump. "Weather advisory. Unexpected fog conditions in French Quarter and surrounding areas. Residents advised to remain indoors until visibility improves." I looked up. The sky was clear blue, not a cloud in sight. The woman frowned at her phone. "Fog? You see any fog?" she asked. Before I could answer, I noticed something strange. A thin mist was curling around the base of the cathedral, despite the heat and clear skies everywhere else. It seemed to be seeping from under the massive wooden doors. "I'm going to check out the cathedral," I told her. moving toward the church steps. "Be careful in there," she called after me. "Time gets funny." I paused. "What do you mean? People think they've been in for an hour, come out and it's been all day. Or the other way round. Watches stop working inside. Cell phones too." I thanked her and continued up the steps. The massive doors were surprisingly cool to the touch as I pulled one open. Inside, the temperature dropped at least 15 degrees. The nave stretched before me, pews arranged in neat rows, stained glass casting colorful patterns across the stone floor. A service was in progress with about 30 people scattered throughout the space. I slid into a back pew and checked my watch. 2:17 p.m. The priest's voice echoed through the cathedral, strangely hypnotic. I found myself struggling to focus on his actual words, only catching phrases here and there. "Time is a gift we must honor. Those who remain shall witness glory. Patience rewards the faithful." My eyelids grew heavy. I pinched myself, determined to stay alert. This was just a normal church service. Nothing strange except for those attendance numbers, and the fog, and the emergency alert that made no sense. I glanced at the parishioners. They sat motionless, eyes fixed on the priest. No coughing, no shifting in seats, no checking of phones. Just perfect stillness. Even their breathing seemed synchronized. Suddenly, my phone vibrated again. Another emergency alert. "System test. This is only a test of the emergency broadcast system. Local authorities will provide further information if necessary." When I looked up from my phone, the priest was staring directly at me. Despite the distance between us, I could see his eyes clearly. They seemed to reflect the stained glass windows, fracturing into kaleidoscopes of color that shouldn't have been possible. He smiled, and for a moment, his face seemed to shift, not changing exactly, but suggesting other faces beneath his own, like multiple exposures in a photograph. "Welcome," he said, though the word never left his lips. I heard it inside my head. "Will you be staying for the entire service?" A woman in the front pew turned to look at me, then another parishioner, and another. Soon all heads were swiveling in unison, eyes fixed on me. Their movements were fluid yet wrong somehow, as if they were puppets controlled by the same hand. I stood abruptly. "I need some air." No one responded, but they tracked my movement as I backed toward the door. When I pushed it open, blinding sunlight flooded in. I stumbled outside, gasping in the humid air. I checked my watch. 2:19 p.m. Only 2 minutes had passed. That couldn't be right. It had felt like at least half an hour. As I descended the steps, I noticed the street vendor was gone. In fact, Jackson Square was nearly empty now. The artists, the tourists, the performers, all had vanished. Only a few people remained, hurrying away from the cathedral area. My phone had no service, but another emergency alert somehow came through. Service notification. Extended worship hours now in effect at all historic churches. Please respect duration requirements. I took one last look at St. Louis Cathedral. The fog was thicker now, curling around the base of the building like tentacles. And I swear I could hear singing from inside, not hymns, but something older. Something that made my skin crawl. I need to speak with Dr. Winters tomorrow, the religious anthropologist who's been tracking church attendance patterns for years. Maybe he can make sense of what I saw today. But tonight, I can't shake the feeling that those eyes are still watching me. And I keep hearing that voice in my head. "Will you be staying for the entire service?" I'm afraid of what happens to those who do. Journal entry number 2, Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel. I didn't sleep well last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those people in St. Louis Cathedral turning to look at me in perfect unison. Their movements mechanical yet fluid. And that priest with the impossible eyes that seemed to contain universes. I woke up several times to check my phone, half expecting to see another emergency alert. This morning, I met Dr. Elijah Winters at Café Du Monde. I chose the location for its crowds and noise. Something about the story makes me uncomfortable with quiet spaces. Dr. Winters stood out even in the tourist-packed cafe, tall and gaunt with a shock of white hair despite being only in his 40s. He wore a linen suit that seemed too formal for the heat, but somehow didn't show a drop of sweat. "Ms. Thibodeau," he greeted me, extending a bony hand. "I've read your work on the unexplained aspects of our fair city. Quite thorough, if perhaps lacking in certain historical contexts." We settled at a table with beignet and coffee. Powdered sugar dusted the table like snow, and for a moment, I was reminded of the strange fog around the cathedral. "You've been tracking church attendance," I began. "Can you tell me about the discrepancies?" Dr. Winters dabbed at his lips with a napkin, leaving no trace of powdered sugar. "Discrepancies is a polite term for what we're seeing. I prefer statistical impossibilities." He pulled a leather-bound notebook from his briefcase and flipped it open. Inside were meticulous hand-drawn graphs, not printouts like Dan had shown me. "For the past century, I've tracked attendance at New Orleans historic churches. A family tradition, you might say." He turned the notebook toward me. "Notice anything?" The graphs showed consistent patterns until 6 months ago, when the lines began to climb sharply, just like the data I'd seen. But Winter's notes went further back, showing similar spikes every 60 years or so. "This has happened before?" I asked. 1900, 1960, and now 2020, he confirmed. "Each time, attendance rises dramatically over several months. Each time, the number of people entering churches exceeds those leaving by an increasing margin." "What happens at the end of these periods?" His face darkened. "Mass disappearances, explained away by authorities as migration, disease outbreaks, or natural disasters." A chill ran through me despite the heavy August heat. "You're saying people just vanish?" "Not just people. Time." He leaned forward. "During these periods, there are reports of temporal anomalies centered around the churches. Watches stopping, people experiencing hours inside that last minutes outside, or vice versa. I thought of my experience yesterday, 2 minutes on my watch that felt like 30 inside the cathedral. Why isn't this common knowledge?" I asked. "Oh, it is in its way." He gestured around us. "It's in our folklore, our ghost stories. The lost congregation of St. Augustine. The eternal mass of St. Mary's. Stories we tell tourists for entertainment, disconnected from their cyclical reality." My phone buzzed. Another emergency alert. "Community notice. Extended church services will continue throughout the week. Attendees should prepare for variable duration worship experiences." Dr. Winter's phone sounded at the same time. He glanced at it, unsurprised. "You've been getting these too?" I asked. "For weeks now." He pocketed his phone. "They come more frequently as we approach the peak. The authorities always find a way to normalize the abnormal." "Ms. Thibodeau, who's sending them?" "The city, ostensibly." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "But I've traced their origin. They're not coming from the emergency alert system's broadcast towers. They're coming from beneath the churches themselves." A streetcar rumbled by, its bell clanging. For a moment, it sounded like church bells, and several patrons around us looked up in confusion. "There's something you should know about me," Dr. Winters said, lowering his voice. "I'm not merely an anthropologist. I work with a government division that monitors anomalous phenomena. We've been watching New Orleans for generations." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You're what? FBI? TEA?" "Nothing so mainstream. We don't have an acronym, just a purpose: to understand what lies beneath certain locations of power. New Orleans has always been one such location." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you've been inside and came out." His gaze was intense. "Most journalists I've tracked who enter the churches during these periods either stay or emerge changed. But you're still yourself. That makes you valuable." My hands trembled slightly as I set down my cup. "Changed how?" Instead of answering directly, he pulled out several photographs and arranged them on the table. They showed people exiting various churches, their expressions vacant, their postures identical despite being different individuals. "Notice their eyes," he said. I leaned closer. In each photo, the subject's eyes reflected stained glass patterns, exactly like the priest I'd seen yesterday. "What happens to them?" I whispered. "They return to their lives, seemingly normal, except for three things. They attend church daily, they encourage others to attend, and they never discuss what happens during services." He gathered the photos. Within weeks, they disappear entirely. A loud crash made us both jump. A waiter had dropped a tray of dishes. The sound of shattering porcelain echoed across the cafe, but what struck me as odd was the rhythm of it. The breaking seemed to follow a pattern, almost like speech. When I turned back to Dr. Winters, he was staring at the mess with unusual intensity. "Did you hear that?" he asked quietly. "The dishes breaking? The message in it." He shook his head. "We should continue this conversation elsewhere, somewhere less public." As we stood to leave, my phone buzzed again. "Transit advisory. All routes leading away from historic church districts experiencing delays. Seek alternate paths or postpone travel." Outside, the quarter was unusually quiet for midday. Tourists moved in small, tight groups, speaking in hushed tones. Street performers were absent. Even the ever-present musicians had vanished from their regular spots. "The city feels wrong," I said as we walked. "The city is holding its breath," Dr. Winters replied. "It knows what's coming." We passed a small corner shop with televisions in the window. All were showing static except for occasional flashes of text that looked like emergency alerts. A small crowd had gathered, watching in silence. "I need to show you my research," Dr. Winters said. "I've mapped the disappearances against architectural plans of the churches. There's a pattern, spaces that shouldn't exist but do. Doors that lead somewhere else." "Where do they lead?" I asked. He stopped walking and looked directly at me. "That's what we need to find out. But I can't go inside again. Last time, I barely escaped, and I wasn't entirely unaffected." For the first time, I noticed a slight reflection in his eyes, the faintest suggestion of stained glass. "You want me to go back in?" I realized, my stomach dropping. "You resisted whatever influence kept others enthralled. You may be able to see what's really happening." He handed me a small device that looked like a watch. "This measures temporal distortions. If it starts to spin backward, you're getting close to whatever is causing this." In the distance, church bells began to ring. All of them, from every direction, despite it not being the hour. The sound was beautiful but discordant, as if each bell was playing a different song. Dr. Winters tensed. "They know we're talking. We don't have much time." He pressed a business card into my hand. "Call this number if you see someone inside the church who shouldn't be there. A figure in clergy robes who doesn't match any known priest. His name is Father Vincent Russo. He appears at every cycle, guiding the process." "The process of what?" "Harvesting," Dr. Winters whispered as the bells grew louder. "They're harvesting something from the faithful, something beyond time." My phone vibrated continuously now, alert after alert flooding the screen. "Worship advisory. Those experiencing temporal inconsistencies during services should remain seated and focused. Safety alert. Report unusual church architectural features to NO authorities immediately. System message. Disregard previous alerts. Standard emergency broadcast system operational." The last one made Dr. Winters grab my arm. "They're fighting for control of the system. We need to separate now. Visit St. Augustine tomorrow. Attendance there has shown the most dramatic discrepancies." As he hurried away, blending into a passing tour group, I noticed something odd about his shadow. It didn't move quite right, as if it were half a second behind him. I stood alone on the street corner, the sound of bells finally fading, wondering what I'd gotten myself into, and whether I'd find my way out. Journal entry number 3, Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel. I meant to visit St. Augustine today, as Dr. Winters suggested, but something drew me back to St. Louis Cathedral instead. Last night, I dreamed of those massive wooden doors opening to reveal not the interior of a church, but an endless corridor stretching into darkness. I woke with the taste of incense in my mouth and the strange certainty that I needed to return. The quarter was unnaturally quiet this morning. Jackson Square, normally bustling with artists and tourists by 9 a.m., was nearly deserted. A lone trumpet player stood at the corner, playing a slow, mournful tune that seemed to bend and distort as it reached my ears. The notes hung in the air too long, overlapping with each other in impossible ways. As I approached the cathedral, I noticed the mist again, thicker this time, clinging to the ground around the building's foundation. The white stones seemed to absorb the morning light rather than reflect it, giving the entire structure an odd, flat appearance, like a crude painting. The temporal measurement device Dr. Winters had given me was strapped to my wrist. It looked like an antique pocket watch, but contained what he described as sensitive equipment. So far, it was keeping normal time. I paused at the bottom of the steps, suddenly reluctant to enter. As I stood there, a woman emerged from the cathedral doors. She moved stiffly, her gaze fixed straight ahead. I recognized her as one of the parishioners who had turned to look at me during my previous visit. "Excuse me," I called out, hurrying up the steps toward her. "Could I ask you a quick question about the service?" She stopped but didn't turn to face me fully. "You should go inside," she said, her voice flat. "The father is waiting." "Which father?" I asked. "Father Russo?" At that name, she flinched slightly, and for a brief moment her eyes cleared, the stained glass reflection fading. "Help us," she whispered, her voice suddenly her own. "They're keeping us between." Then her eyes glazed over again, the kaleidoscope of colors returning. She smiled vacantly. "Service starts on time but ends when it needs to. You should hurry in." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with another alert. "Worship notice. St. Louis Cathedral welcomes devoted attendees for special extended meditation. Enter with an open mind. Exit when permitted." The woman glanced at my phone and nodded slightly. "See? You're expected." She continued down the steps, moving with that same unnatural stiffness. The watch on my wrist ticked normally, but as I approached the cathedral doors, I noticed the second hand briefly stutter, jumping backward for a moment before continuing forward. Inside, the cathedral was transformed. Where before there had been maybe 30 people scattered throughout the pews, now there must have been hundreds, filling nearly every seat. The air was thick with incense, and the light through the stained glass windows created patterns across the congregation that seemed to move independently of the sun's position. I slipped into a back pew and checked my watch. 9:17 a.m. The device from Dr. Winters showed the same time, but its second hand was moving slightly slower than it should. The priest at the altar wasn't the same one I'd seen during my first visit. This man was older, his face deeply lined, his vestments more elaborate. He spoke in Latin rather than English, his voice resonating in a way that made the wooden pews vibrate beneath my fingers. I glanced around, trying to spot Father Russo among the clergy, but saw no one matching Dr. Winters' description of a figure who shouldn't be there. The service progressed in a hypnotic rhythm. Stand, sit, kneel. Responses chanted in perfect unison. I found myself joining in despite not knowing the words, my lips moving of their own accord. Each time I caught myself and stopped, a parishioner nearby would turn slightly to look at me, their eyes reflecting stained glass. I checked my watch again. 9:22 a.m. Only 5 minutes had passed, but the sun through the windows had moved as if hours had elapsed. The device from Dr. Winters now showed a different time entirely. 11:47 a.m. The second hand was moving counterclockwise. A movement near the side altar caught my attention. A door I hadn't noticed before stood ajar, and through it stepped a tall figure in ornate black vestments that seemed to absorb the light around them. His face was handsome but oddly ageless, his eyes deep-set and dark. Father Russo. He surveyed the congregation with a satisfied expression, then looked directly at me. Unlike the vacant stares of the parishioners, his gaze was sharp and aware. He knew I didn't belong. I pretended to focus on the service, but from the corner of my eye, I watched as he moved along the outer wall of the cathedral. He stopped to whisper to several parishioners, who nodded and then sat straighter, their postures becoming even more rigid. My phone vibrated in my pocket, but when I tried to check it, I found my arms suddenly heavy, unwilling to move. Around me, the congregation swayed slightly, as if moved by an invisible breeze. Their synchronized motion created ripples through the air that distorted my vision. With considerable effort, I forced my hand into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The message wasn't an emergency alert this time, but a text from an unknown number. Left transept, painting of ascension. Press third flower from right. Hurry. I glanced up to see Father Russo moving purposefully in my direction. The device on my wrist was spinning rapidly backward now, the hands becoming a blur. Moving as naturally as possible, I slipped out of my pew and made my way toward the left transept, a side area of the cathedral. My legs felt leaden, each step requiring conscious effort. The air had thickened to the consistency of honey, and sounds reached me with a delay, creating an echo effect that disoriented me further. I found the painting, a large depiction of Christ's ascension into heaven, surrounded by a border of ornate flowers. My fingers felt numb as I reached for the third flower from the right and pressed it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard a soft click, and a section of the wall beside the painting swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Without hesitation, I slipped inside, pulling the hidden door closed behind me. The passage was dimly lit by small lights embedded in the floor. The air was cooler here, and my head immediately cleared. The heaviness in my limbs vanished. I checked the device on my wrist. It had stopped spinning and now displayed my actual watch time. 9:34 a.m. I followed the passage, which sloped gently downward. The walls were old stone, worn smooth by time. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into a small chamber that appeared to be some kind of monitoring station. A desk held several screens showing different areas of the cathedral. One displayed the congregation, still swaying in unison. Another showed Father Russo, now standing exactly where I had been, his expression thunderous as he scanned the pews. "You made it out. Good." I whirled around to find a man sitting in the shadows of the chamber. He wore the collar of a priest but was younger than the others I'd seen, with close-cropped hair and nervous eyes. "Father Vincent?" I asked, remembering Dr. Winter's warning about a priest who appeared at every cycle. He laughed bitterly. "No, I'm just Father Paul. The real priests are still up there, or what's left of them." He gestured to the screens. "That's Vincent Russo you're seeing, though that's not his real name. He appears every 60 years when they harvest." "Who are they? What's happening in this church?" Father Paul's hands trembled as he folded them in his lap. "I'm not sure you'd believe me if I told you. I hardly believe it myself, and I've been hiding down here for weeks, watching them take over." My phone buzzed again. Emergency alert. Reports of structural instability at St. Louis Cathedral. All visitors must exit through main doors immediately. Father Paul looked at my phone and shook his head. "They know you've slipped away. That alert is only on your phone, trying to lure you back up." On the screen, Father Russo was now speaking to the congregation, his arms raised dramatically. The parishioners had stopped swaying and were now perfectly still, their heads tilted back at identical angles. "What are they doing to those people?" I whispered. "They're not doing anything to them," Father Paul said. "They're doing something with them, using their minds, their attention, I don't know what to call it, their spiritual energy, to open something." "Open what?" He pointed to a different screen that showed the altar from above. From this angle, I could see that the floor around it had changed. The stone now appeared rippled, like the surface of water disturbed by a stone. "A door," he said simply. "They're thinning the boundary between here and somewhere else. Somewhere they want to come through." The temporal device on my wrist suddenly spun wildly, then cracked, the glass face splitting with a sound like ice breaking. "We need to leave," Father Paul said, standing abruptly. "That's the warning sign. Time is about to..." fluctuate. Dramatically, as if on cue, all the screens showing the cathedral interior suddenly went black. "Too late," he whispered. "Journal entry number 4 Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel." Father Paul and I remained in the hidden chamber beneath St. Louis Cathedral for what felt like hours after the screens went black. In reality, according to my phone, the only timepiece still functioning after Dr. Winter's device shattered, only 20 minutes passed. "The fluctuation is over," Father Paul finally said, tapping at a keyboard. The screens flickered back to life, showing the cathedral's interior once more. The congregation was gone. The pews stood empty, and the rippling effect around the altar had subsided. "Where did they all go?" I asked, watching as Father Russo moved methodically through the empty church, running his hand along the backs of pews. "Some will have been released, the newer attendees, the ones not yet fully synchronized. The others," he hesitated. "The others are still there, just not visible to our eyes anymore. They've been shifted slightly out of phase with our reality." Before I could question him further, Father Paul pressed a small device into my hand, a USB drive. "I've been recording the services, trying to document what's happening. Take this. Maybe you can make sense of it." His eyes darted nervously to the screens. "You need to leave now while Russo is distracted. The passage continues through to the rectory garden. Don't let him see you." "What about you?" "I'll stay. Someone needs to witness." His smile was grim. "Besides, I'm safest here in this space between spaces." I wanted to ask more questions, but the urgency in his voice convinced me to go. I pocketed the USB drive and followed the passage as it curved upward, eventually emerging behind a hedge in a small, enclosed garden. The sunlight seemed harsh after the dimness below, and I had to shield my eyes as I slipped out of the church grounds and onto a side street. My phone buzzed. "Weather advisory. Unexpected electrical storm approaching French Quarter. Residents advised to avoid open areas and metal structures, including church bell towers." I looked up at the sky, perfectly clear, without a cloud in sight. Yet as the alert faded from my screen, I heard a low rumble of thunder in the distance. Back at my apartment, I inserted Father Paul's USB drive into my laptop. It contained dozens of video files, each labeled with a date and time. I clicked on the most recent one, recorded just yesterday. The video showed the same congregation I'd seen today, swaying in unison as Father Russo led them in what appeared to be a normal Catholic Mass. But when I adjusted the volume, I realized the words weren't standard liturgy. They were something older, in a language I couldn't identify. More disturbing were the architectural anomalies visible in the footage. Columns appeared where none should be. The ceiling vaulted higher than the cathedral's actual structure allowed. Windows showed night skies despite the timestamp indicating morning. I began taking notes, cross-referencing the footage with floor plans of St. Louis Cathedral I found online. The disparities were impossible. Spaces that couldn't exist, dimensions that defied the building's footprint. A knock at my door startled me. I closed my laptop and approached cautiously. "Who is it?" I called. "Officer Baptiste, NOPD," came the response. "I need to ask you a few questions, Ms. Thibodeau." I opened the door to find a uniformed police officer, her badge reading D. Baptiste. She was mid-30s, with close-cropped hair and a stern expression that didn't quite match her eyes. They looked tired, worried. "How can I help you, officer?" I asked, leaving the door half-closed. "You've been seen entering and exiting St. Louis Cathedral and meeting with Dr. Elijah Winters." It wasn't a question. "May I come in?" Reluctantly, I stepped aside. Officer Baptiste entered but remained standing, her eyes scanning my apartment until they landed on my laptop. "You're investigating the churches," she said. "The missing people." "I'm a journalist working on a story about church attendance," I replied carefully. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That's what they all say at first." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo, a smiling young woman in graduation regalia. "This is my sister, Monique. 3 weeks ago, She went to noon mass at St. Augustine and never came home. I studied the photo. Did you file a missing persons report? Of course I did. You know what they told me? That she wasn't missing. That surveillance footage showed her leaving the church and walking away. Officer Baptiste's voice cracked slightly. But the footage they showed me, that wasn't my sister. It looked like her, but the way she moved was all wrong. And her eyes reflected stained glass. I finished. Officer Baptiste's head snapped up. You've seen it too. I nodded slowly, then made a decision. I opened my laptop and played one of Father Paul's videos. Watched the eyes of the parishioners. We viewed the footage together. On screen, the congregation moved through the service with perfect synchronization, their eyes occasionally catching the light and reflecting the colors of the stained glass windows. But the reflections remained even when they faced away from the windows. What's happening to them? Officer Baptiste whispered. I'm not sure yet, I admitted, but it's connected to these. I showed her the emergency alerts on my phone. They started appearing right when the attendance numbers began showing discrepancies. Officer Baptiste pulled out her own phone. I've been getting them too. Thought they were standard emergency system tests at first, but they've been getting stranger. As if on cue, both our phones buzzed simultaneously. Public safety notice. Increased reports of disorientation near historic churches. Citizens experiencing temporal confusion should report to nearest medical facility. Officer Baptiste stared at the alert, then back at me. Temporal confusion. That's exactly what happened when I went looking for Monique at St. Augustine. I was inside for what felt like minutes, but when I came out, 3 hours had passed. I told her about my own experiences at St. Louis Cathedral, about Dr. Winters and his research, and about the hidden chamber where Father Paul monitored the services. This is insane, she said finally. If what you're saying is true, we're dealing with some kind of… what? Cult? Mass hypnosis? Or something not entirely human? I suggested quietly. She shook her head. I'm a police officer. I deal in evidence. Facts. This is… watch this, I interrupted, pulling up another video file labeled Altar Transformation. The footage showed the altar area of St. Louis Cathedral during what appeared to be an empty moment between services. As we watched, the stone floor began to ripple like water. The ripples spread outward, and for a brief moment, the altar itself seemed to flicker, revealing something underneath. A structure of impossible geometry, angles that hurt the eyes to look at directly. That's not possible, Officer Baptiste whispered. Neither is this. I opened another file showing a service led by Father Russo. I paused the video and zoomed in on his face, then advanced frame by frame. In 3 consecutive frames, his face changed completely, becoming something elongated and vaguely insectal before returning to human appearance. Officer Baptiste stepped back from the laptop. I need to talk to my captain about this. No, I said quickly. We don't know who else might be affected. Dr. Winters said the people who come out of the churches changed try to bring others in. Your captain might be one of them. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. What about this Dr. Winters? Can we trust him? I'm not entirely sure, I admitted, remembering the faint stained glass reflection I'd noticed in his eyes. But we need more information before we can do anything. I have access to city records, Officer Baptiste offered. Building plans, permits, historical documents. If there are hidden chambers or passages in these churches, there might be records. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was a text from an unknown number. Don't trust the records. They've been altered. Meet me at Lafayette Cemetery number 1 tomorrow at noon. Come alone. I showed the message to Officer Baptiste. Dr. Winters, I explained. She frowned. Cemeteries are easier to monitor than churches. Fewer exits. She seemed to be thinking like a police officer again. I'll keep my distance, but I'll be there, just in case. As she prepared to leave, thunder rumbled outside. Much closer now, despite the still clear sky visible through my window. "The storm that isn't there?" Officer Baptiste murmured, glancing outside. "Be careful," I told her, "and maybe don't attend any church services for a while." She nodded grimly. "I'm more interested in getting into those hidden chambers you mentioned. If there's any chance Monique is still in there, still herself somewhere." After she left, I returned to Father Paul's videos, searching for any clue we might have missed. In one of the oldest files, dated 3 months ago, I noticed something odd. During a normal Sunday service, before the strange events began escalating, the camera caught a brief glimpse of a figure standing in the back of the cathedral. Father Vincent Russo. He wasn't leading the service yet, just watching, observing, planning. Outside, impossible thunder rolled across a cloudless sky, and my lights flickered in response. Journal entry number 5, Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel. Lafayette Cemetery number 1 is a city of the dead, with its white mausoleums and above-ground tombs forming neat rows like miniature houses. The Garden District landmark normally draws tourists with cameras and ghost tour guides spinning tales, but today it was eerily vacant. Yellow police tape cordoned off the main entrance, with a sign declaring, "Temporary closure, structural assessment." I ducked under the tape, feeling Officer Baptiste's watchful presence somewhere behind me. We'd agreed she would keep her distance, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough that Dr. Winters wouldn't spot her. The cemetery was unnaturally silent. No birdsong, no distant traffic, not even the sound of insects. My footsteps on the stone path seemed muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing sound. The humidity pressed against my skin like a damp cloth, yet the usual sheen of sweat didn't form. It was as if my body had forgotten how to respond normally to the New Orleans heat. Dr. Winters was waiting by an ornate family tomb, his tall figure somehow blending with the stonework despite his pale coloring. The stained glass reflection in his eyes seemed more pronounced today, dancing with colors that shifted as he turned toward me. "You weren't followed?" he asked without greeting.
"Elite smoothly. No."
I was careful. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I have something to show you. Something the government division I mentioned has been collecting for centuries." He led me to a large tomb bearing the name Winters in faded letters. With practiced movements, he pressed several decorative elements in sequence. A section of stone slid aside, revealing steps leading downward. "Your family tomb is an entrance to a secret archive?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "The tomb is relatively new, 1890s. The archive beneath it is much older." He gestured for me to enter. "Ladies first." I hesitated, remembering the hidden chamber beneath St. Louis Cathedral. "How do I know this isn't a trap?" "You don't." His smile was thin. "But your alternatives are dwindling, Ms. Thibodeau. The churches are claiming more people daily, and the authorities are either oblivious or complicit." My phone buzzed. "Community alert. Lafayette Cemetery number 1 closed for maintenance and historical preservation. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Dr. Winters glanced at my phone. "They know we're here. We should hurry." With a deep breath, I descended the stone steps. Dr. Winters followed, pressing something that caused the entrance to slide closed behind us. Motion-activated lights flickered on, illuminating a tunnel that looked nothing like the crude passage beneath the cathedral. This was modern, with smooth concrete walls and proper electric lighting. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber that took my breath away. It resembled an old library or archive, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books, scrolls, and artifacts. Modern computer terminals sat alongside ancient-looking tables strewn with maps and documents. "Welcome to the New Orleans Theological Anomaly Archive," Dr. Winters announced with a hint of pride. "One of 12 such facilities around the world, monitoring locations where the veil between realities grows thin." I approached a nearby table where maps of New Orleans were spread out, showing the locations of churches with red circles. Lines connected them in patterns that seemed to form symbols. "These aren't random," I noted, tracing a pattern that resembled a complex star. No, the founders of New Orleans knew exactly what they were doing when they planned the city's sacred spaces. Dr. Winters moved to a computer and began typing. The churches were built as anchors, holding something in place, or keeping something out. What exactly are we dealing with, Dr. Winters? I asked directly. You've hinted at entities, at harvesting, at doors opening. I need the full truth, he sighed, looking suddenly older. We call them the congregants. They exist in a dimension adjacent to ours, one where time and space operate differently. They cannot fully enter our reality, but they can influence it through points of concentration. Churches, any place where human attention and faith are focused consistently over time. Churches, temples, sacred sites. In New Orleans, it's predominantly the historic Catholic churches. He pulled up images on the computer screen, architectural diagrams of St. Louis Cathedral, St. Augustine, and others, showing hidden spaces that matched what I'd seen in Father Paul's videos. Every 60 years, the dimensional boundaries naturally thin, he continued. The congregants take advantage of this to establish footholds. They need human consciousness to open the way, minds focused in devotion that they can redirect. To what end? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. They feed on a specific type of human energy, not quite consciousness, not quite soul, but something generated when humans contemplate eternity. His voice had taken on a lecturer's tone. Religious worship is particularly rich in this energy. The congregants harvest it, drawing worshippers partially into their dimension where time moves differently. A service that feels like an hour to the attendee might actually keep them suspended in that state for days or weeks as they're slowly drained. I thought of the congregation swaying in unison, of time distorting around me in the cathedral. And Father Russo, not human, a projection of their collective will, given form to direct the harvesting. In each cycle, he appears as a visiting or substitute priest, gradually taking control of the churches. Dr. Winters looked at my phone with alarm. They've detected us. The congregants can manipulate electronic signals now. They couldn't do that in previous cycles. He moved quickly to a cabinet and retrieved a small device. Put this on your phone. It'll block their interference. I attached the device, a small metallic disc, to the back of my phone. The screen immediately cleared. In previous cycles, the harvesting was limited to those who willingly entered the churches. Dr. Winters continued, moving urgently now, gathering documents and placing them in a folder. But something's different this time. They're becoming more aggressive, extending their influence beyond the church walls. The emergency alerts, I realized. They're using our own warning systems against us. Exactly. Modern technology gives them new vectors for manipulation. He handed me the folder. These documents detail the history of the cycles, back to 1720. I'm giving them to you because I don't think I'll be able to continue this work much longer. For the first time, I noticed a tremor in his hands, and the stained glass reflection in his eyes had intensified. You went into one of the churches recently, didn't you? I asked. After you warned me not to. He nodded grimly. St. Mary's Assumption. I thought I could sabotage their efforts from inside. I was wrong. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a pattern on his skin, intricate lines that resembled stained glass, spreading up his arm like an infection. I'm changing. Soon I won't be myself anymore. There must be a way to stop this, I insisted. To close whatever doors they're opening. There is. That's why I needed someone like you, someone who resisted their influence. He moved to another cabinet and removed what looked like an old leather-bound journal. This belonged to Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen? I asked, stunned. She faced the congregants during the 1840s cycle, found a way to disrupt their harvesting ritual. He placed the journal in my hands. Her methods were unorthodox but effective. The cycle ended prematurely that time. A deep rumble shook the archive, dust drifting from the ceiling. They're trying to find us, Dr. Winters said. We don't have much time. I opened Marie Laveau's journal, the pages brittle with age. The handwriting was elegant but difficult to decipher, interspersed with diagrams and symbols. She discovered that the churches themselves are more than buildings, Dr. Winters explained, pointing to a diagram showing St. Louis Cathedral with strange markings. They're machines designed to focus and channel spiritual energy. If the focal points are disrupted at the right moment, another rumble, stronger this time. Books tumbled from shelves. I need to get these to safety, I said, holding the folder and journal. And we need to find Officer Baptiste. Dr. Winters frowned. Who? Before I could explain, a section of the archive wall slid open, revealing Officer Baptiste with her weapon drawn. NOPD. Hands where I can see them. Dr. Winters. Dr. Winters tensed. You led the police here? Do you have any idea what you've done? She's here to help. I started to explain, but another violent tremor cut me off, sending all three of us staggering. We need to leave now, Officer Baptiste urged. Something's happening at the cemetery above us. People are gathering, dozens of them, all walking in the same weird way. Dr. Winters' face paled. It's starting. They're coming for the archives. My phone buzzed one final time. Emergency evacuation. All citizens must proceed to nearest historic church for shelter and instructions. This is not a drill. They're trying to round up the whole city. I realized with horror. We need to split up, Dr. Winters said decisively. Ms. Thibodeau, take Marie's journal and go with Officer Baptiste. I'll create a diversion. But you said yourself you're changing, I protested. What if you? I can use that to our advantage, he interrupted. They'll sense me as one of their own, at least partially. It should buy you time. He moved to a different section of wall and pressed a sequence of bricks. Another passage opened. This leads to the Garden District. Get to St. Augustine, that's where the focal point is strongest. If you can disrupt it according to Marie's instructions, the ceiling gave an ominous crack. Plaster rained down on us. Go! Dr. Winters shouted. Find Father Paul, he knows the hidden ways. And remember, time moves differently around the congregants. What feels like minutes might be hours or vice versa. Don't trust your perceptions. Officer Baptiste grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the passage. I clutched Marie Laveau's journal and the folder of documents tightly. The last image I had of Dr. Winters was him standing amid the falling debris of the archive, the stained glass patterns in his eyes blazing like fire, spreading visibly across his face in fractal patterns. Then the wall closed between us, and Officer Baptiste and I were running through darkness, the sound of pursuit echoing from somewhere behind. Journal entry number 6, Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel. The passage beneath the cemetery collapsed behind us as Officer Baptiste and I emerged into the sweltering Garden District afternoon. We stumbled onto a quiet side street lined with magnolia trees, the grand historic homes looking unnervingly normal in contrast to what we'd just escaped. We need to get off the street, Baptiste said, holstering her weapon and scanning our surroundings. My car's 3 blocks from here. I clutched Marie Laveau's journal and Dr. Winters' documents to my chest, feeling the weight of their importance. Where can we go? If the congregants are using emergency alerts to funnel people into churches, my aunt's place, Baptiste replied without hesitation. Small shotgun house in Tremé. No church within 5 blocks. As we hurried through the quiet streets, I noticed the stillness. No pedestrians, no passing cars. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned the Garden District. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of church bells, a cacophony of different tones from all directions, ringing out of sync. They never ring at this hour, Baptiste muttered, quickening her pace. When we reached her unmarked police cruiser, Baptiste's radio crackled to life. All units respond to crowd control situation at St. Louis Cathedral. Repeat, all available units to French Quarter for crowd control. Situation classified as Civil Emergency Level 2. Baptiste turned the volume down but didn't respond to the call. That's how they got most of the force, she explained, starting the engine. Emergency calls to churches. Half the department went in and never came out. As we pulled away from the curb, every electronic device in the car, the radio, the dashboard computer, Baptiste's phone and mine, simultaneously emitted the harsh tone of an emergency alert. Citywide emergency. All residents must proceed to nearest place of worship for shelter and safety instructions. Compliance mandatory. NOPD enforcement in progress. The text remained on our phones even after dismissing it. A moment later, a second alert. Warning, warning. Dangerous atmospheric contaminant detected. Shelter in sacred spaces only. Seeking alternate shelter may result in respiratory failure. Warning, they're getting more sophisticated, I said, studying the alerts. First it was just service announcements, then extended services. Now it's atmospheric threats and mandatory compliance. Baptiste drove with grim focus, taking side streets and avoiding main roads. They're adapting to resistance, learning what messages get results. Dr. Winters said they couldn't do this in previous cycles. Technology is giving them new ways to influence people. The Treme neighborhood appeared ahead, its colorful shotgun houses a stark contrast to the Garden District's mansions. Baptiste slowed as we approached a yellow house with peeling paint and a small porch. "Wait here," she ordered, drawing her weapon before approaching the house. She peered through windows and checked the door before waving me forward. Inside, the house was modestly furnished but spotless. Family photos lined the walls, Baptiste in uniform at her academy graduation, an older woman with Baptiste's same determined eyes, various family gatherings. "My aunt's in Atlanta visiting my cousin," Baptiste explained. "We should be safe here for a while." I set the documents on a small dining table and carefully opened Marie Laveau's journal. The handwriting was elaborate, filled with symbols and diagrams that seemed to depict the churches of New Orleans with strange geometric patterns overlaid. "I need to decipher this," I said. "But first, we should check if Dr. Winters made it out." "No one made it out of that cemetery," Baptiste replied flatly. "I watched from a distance. After we escaped, dozens of people surrounded the area. They just stood there. Then they started digging with their bare hands where the tunnel collapsed." I shuddered at the image. Were they trying to reach us or the archives? Don't know. But they weren't normal Thibodeau. Their movements were wrong, jerky, synchronized. Like puppets. She checked her service weapon, counting bullets. "I have to report in eventually or they'll track me down as AWOL. Can you trust anyone at the department?" She considered this. "Maybe Captain Landry. He's been avoiding the church calls, sending junior officers instead." A soft knocking at the door froze us both. Baptiste motioned for me to gather the documents and move to the kitchen while she approached the door, gun ready. "Who is it?" she called. "Please, help me." The voice was weak, cracking with emotion. "I got out. I escaped from St. Anthony's. They're looking for me." Baptiste peered through the peephole, then glanced back at me with surprise. "It's Alvin Tucker, homeless guy who hangs around my precinct. Harmless." She opened the door cautiously, keeping her weapon visible. The man who stumbled in barely resembled a normal human being. While clearly once a middle-aged black man, his appearance was horrifying. Gaunt to the point of emaciation, skin hanging loosely as if he'd lost half his body weight. Most disturbing were his eyes, sunken deep into their sockets with a glazed, distant look. "Jesus Christ," Baptiste whispered, helping him to the couch. "Alvin, what happened to you?" "Church," he rasped, his voice like sandpaper. "St. Anthony's. Went for the free meal program 3 days ago." 3 days. Baptiste looked at me significantly. "Alvin, that church hasn't had a meal program in months." "Was announcement." He fumbled in his pocket, producing a crumpled flyer. "Emergency food distribution." The flyer advertised a special meal service at St. Anthony's, dated 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks, not 3 days. "How long were you inside, Alvin?" I asked gently, approaching slowly. His eyes found me struggling to focus. Few hours, just a service and a meal. Sat in the back. Felt strange, like falling asleep. When I woke up, everyone was still there. But, he shuddered. They weren't moving right, all staring at the altar. Priest's voice kept going, never stopped, but his mouth wasn't moving anymore. Baptiste brought him water, which he gulped desperately. How did you get out? Maintenance closet. Had a door. Crawled through pipes. His hands shook violently. Been running ever since. They keep finding me. People with glass eyes, telling me to come back to service. I noticed something alarming. Gray streaks spreading through his hair as we watched, as if he were aging before our eyes. Alvin, I said carefully, what day do you think it is today? He blinked in confusion. Thursday, January 12th. Baptiste and I exchanged glances. It was February 27th. The time distortion, I murmured. Dr. Winters said it would be different for everyone. Alvin's phone suddenly buzzed in his pocket. He jerked as if shocked, fumbling to retrieve it. The screen glowed with an alert. Patient recovery notice. Alvin Tucker has escaped medical quarantine. The scene, do not approach. Call emergency services immediately. Patient is experiencing severe temporal psychosis and requires immediate treatment. Almost instantly, our phones buzzed with a different message. Citizen alert. Mentally disturbed individual reported in Treme area. Lock doors and report sightings to authority. Do not offer shelter. They're tracking him, Baptiste said, moving to the windows to close blinds. And they know he's here. How is that possible? I asked. The phones? Alvin whispered, suddenly lucid. They use the phones. They can see through them, hear through them. With surprising speed, he grabbed his phone and smashed it against the edge of the coffee table. Too late. They already know. Outside, church bells began ringing again. Closer this time, though there was no church nearby. Baptiste made a decision. We need to move. They'll send someone, police, paramedics, or worse. We can't just leave him, I protested. I'm coming with you, Alvin insisted, struggling to his feet. I know things I saw inside, the spaces behind the walls, the faces in the stained glass. As he stood, I noticed his back was severely hunched, his movements stiff like an elderly man's. The rapid aging was continuing before our eyes. Alvin, I asked carefully, how old are you? 34, he replied. Baptiste couldn't hide her shock. The man before us appeared at least 70. The congregants, I realized. Dr. Winters said they feed on human energy. They must have been feeding on him for far longer than he experienced. Alvin nodded frantically. Time's all wrong in there. I watched the sun rise and set through the windows over and over, but the service never ended. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. The priest, Father Vincent, I saw what he really is. When the light hit the altar just right, I could see through him. There's nothing inside, just colors and angles that hurt to look at. A vehicle pulled up outside, the distinctive sound of an NOPD cruiser. Back door, Baptiste whispered, grabbing her keys and the journal from the table. I collected the folder of documents. As we moved toward the kitchen, all our phones, including Baptiste's police radio, emitted the emergency tone simultaneously. Quarantine update. Temporal anomaly spreading from church centers. All residents must report to containment shelters immediately. Time slip exposure is fatal. Secure shelters available only at designated sacred spaces. The message repeated, growing louder with each iteration until it was almost painful. Turn everything off, Baptiste ordered, powering down her devices. I did the same. The silence that followed was broken by a loud knock at the front door. NOPD. Officer Baptiste, we know you're in there. Captain Landry sent us to bring you in for debriefing. Baptiste tensed at the mention of Landry. He wouldn't send a patrol unit, she whispered. He'd call me directly. Through the kitchen window, I could see two officers approaching the back door. Their movements were too synchronized, too fluid, like dancers in perfect harmony. "There's a crawl space," Baptiste whispered, pointing to a small door near the floor in the hallway. "Under the house. We can access the neighbor's yard." As we crouched by the small door, Alvin suddenly doubled over in pain. His skin seemed to ripple, aging years in seconds. "I can't," he gasped. "They're pulling me back. The service isn't over. Never over." His eyes met mine, momentarily clear and terrified. "Find Father Paul," he whispered, echoing Dr. Winter's words. "The real one. He knows how they move between spaces." The front door splintered as police battering rams hit it. "Go," Alvin said, straightening with apparent effort. "I'll distract them." Before we could stop him, he shuffled toward the front door, calling out, "Coming, officers." Just an old man moving slow. Baptiste pulled me toward the crawl space. We squeezed through the small opening just as officers burst into the house. The last thing I heard as we crawled through the dark, damp space beneath the house was Alvin's voice, suddenly strong and resonant, but with an underlying harmonic that raised the hairs on my neck. "Brothers, sisters, the service calls us back. The congregants await our return to St. Anthony's. Will you join me in prayer?" Then came the sound of movement, of voices speaking in unison, and finally silence. By the time we emerged into the neighbor's yard, Baptiste's aunt's house was empty. No officers, no patrol cars, no Alvin. Just an abandoned house with the doors standing open. In the distance, church bells rang in perfect synchrony for the first time. Journal entry number 7, Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel. We spent the night in an abandoned storage unit Baptiste knew about near the industrial canal. The metal container was stifling, but it had no windows, no electronics, nothing the congregants could use to track us. Still, sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the distant sound of church bells ringing at irregular hours throughout the night. "This makes no sense," Baptiste muttered as dawn filtered through the cracks in the door. She was poring over Marie Laveau's journal, squinting in the dim light. "Half of this is in French Creole, and the other half might as well be alien." I glanced over at the pages. The Voodoo Queen's handwriting swooped and swirled across the yellowed paper, interspersed with diagrams of church floor plans overlaid with geometric patterns that seemed to shift if you stared too long. "Dr. Winter said she disrupted their ritual during the 1840s cycle," I said, studying a particularly complex drawing of St. Louis Cathedral. "There must be something here that tells us how." Baptiste suddenly froze, her hand hovering over a page. "This symbol. I've seen it before." She pointed to a distinctive mark that resembled a cross with additional elements, curves and angles that transformed it into something less Christian and more otherworldly. "It's carved into the floor of the evidence lockup at my precinct. Always thought it was just graffiti." She looked up, eyes widening. "The precinct was built on the site of a church that burned down in 1912. My phone, powered off since our escape from Baptiste's aunt's house, suddenly chimed with an alert. "Impossible, unless they can activate our devices now," I whispered, staring at the screen as it lit up with a message. "Civil Defense Update. Mandatory sunrise service today. All citizens report to nearest church for protection protocol. Temporal anomalies have intensified. Non-compliance will result in abandonment outside safety zones." Below the text was a map showing the nearest safety zone, the Precinct 4 police station. Baptiste's expression hardened. "They're trying to draw us into a trap. Or," I hesitated, "what if the evidence lockup is important? If it has that symbol, maybe it's connected to whatever Marie Laveau did to stop them." "Too risky," Baptiste argued. "The precinct will be crawling with officers, and we don't know which ones are still themselves." I flipped through the journal, stopping at a passage where the writing seemed clearer, more urgent.
Les objets sacrés doivent être placés au point de concentration. La police les a pris après les messes noires. Cet objet, cette église, cette porte.
"Sacred objects must be placed at concentration points," I translated roughly. "The police took them after the Black Masses. 7 objects, 7 churches, 7 doors. Baptiste's expression changed. There's a collection of confiscated, occult items in our evidence lockup. Been there for decades, centuries maybe. No one's allowed to remove them. That has to be it, I insisted. Marie Laveau's sacred objects. The police confiscated them after she used them to disrupt the ritual, and they've been sitting in our evidence room ever since. Baptiste checked her service weapon. Right above the symbol you just showed me, the decision crystallized between us. We had to go to the precinct. The city had transformed overnight. As we cautiously made our way through back streets toward the French Quarter, we saw people moving in strange, synchronized patterns, walking in perfect formation toward various churches. Their faces were blank, eyes forward, movements mechanical. Electronic billboards along Canal Street flashed emergency alerts instead of advertisements. Attend today's unified service. Salvation through congregation. Time is running out. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, Baptiste murmured as we ducked into an alley to avoid a procession of blank-faced pedestrians. It's like they've already won. We were 2 blocks from the precinct when we heard the sirens, not emergency vehicles, but the civil defense system. The wailing rose and fell across the city, the sound seeming to come from everywhere at once. Every cell phone, car radio, and public address system joined the chorus, broadcasting the same message. This is not a test. The final service begins at noon. All souls must be present. The doors are closing. What time is it? I asked, suddenly aware that I'd lost track. Baptiste checked her watch. 11:17. We have less than an hour. The precinct building loomed ahead, an Art Deco structure from the 1930s with stone steps leading to imposing double doors. Unlike the surrounding streets, which were eerily empty save for the processionals of entranced citizens, the area around the precinct buzzed with activity. Officers moved purposefully, directing confused-looking civilians toward St. Louis Cathedral. They're using the police to round up stragglers, I whispered as we watched from behind a parked delivery truck. We need a distraction, Baptiste said, eyes scanning the scene. Her gaze settled on a patrol car parked nearby, keys dangling from the ignition. Wait here. Before I could protest, she slipped away, keeping to the shadows. I watched as she approached the patrol car from behind, sliding into the driver's seat in one smooth motion. The engine roared to life, and suddenly the car's siren was wailing, lights flashing as Baptiste accelerated directly toward the precinct steps. Officers scattered as the patrol car mounted the curb, slamming into a decorative pillar with a terrible crash. In the ensuing chaos, officers rushing to the scene, civilians panicking. I darted across the street and slipped in through a side entrance, praying Baptiste had survived. The precinct interior was surprisingly quiet, most officers apparently deployed for the final service roundup. I navigated the hallways based on Baptiste's directions, finding my way to the evidence lockup in the basement. The door was secured with an electronic keypad. I hesitated, then typed in the code Baptiste had given me, 1-8-4-0, the year of Marie Laveau's confrontation with the congregants. The lock clicked open. The evidence room was vast, with rows of shelves holding labeled boxes and bags, the physical detritus of decades of police work. At the far end stood an ancient iron cage, its door secured with multiple padlocks. Inside, on dusty velvet-lined shelves, sat an array of objects that seemed to absorb the fluorescent lighting, creating pockets of shadow. As I approached, I noticed the symbol from Marie's journal carved into the concrete floor directly in front of the cage. A cross twisted into something older and stranger. The objects inside the cage seemed to pulse with an inner light as I drew nearer. 7 items arranged in a specific pattern. A carved bone knife, a silver chalice darkened with age, a leather-bound book smaller than a playing card, a rosary made of what looked like teeth, a small clay jar sealed with wax, a copper disc etched with symbols, and a vial of black liquid that seemed to move of its own accord. I reached for the padlocks, then froze at the sound of footsteps behind me. Step away from the artifacts, Miss Thibodeau. I turned slowly to find Captain Landry, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and the rigid posture of a former military officer, standing in the doorway. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes held the now familiar stained glass reflection. "You're one of them," I said, backing toward the cage. "Not yet," he replied, his voice eerily calm. "But I will be after the final service, as will everyone in New Orleans." He stepped forward, revealing Officer Baptiste behind him, her face bloody from the crash, hands cuffed behind her back. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, eyes downcast. "I couldn't get away." "Officer Baptiste proved most resilient," Landry said with something like admiration. "We had high hopes she would join us willingly, given her connection to the sacred spaces." Baptiste's head snapped up. "What are you talking about? Your family has served as guardians for generations," Landry explained. "Your great-grandmother was particularly devoted, Marie Fontenot, keeper of St. Augustine's western door." The name struck me like lightning. I'd seen it in Marie Laveau's journal, Fontenot, listed among her trusted allies. "You're lying?" Baptiste spat, struggling against her cuffs. "The blood remembers, even when the mind forgets." Landry's voice took on a strange harmonic quality that raised the hairs on my neck. "It's why you've resisted so effectively. But today the barriers fall. The congregants will fully manifest, and time itself will bend to their will." My phone buzzed in my pocket, then Baptiste's, then every electronic device in the evidence room, creating a cacophony of alert tones. "The final service commences. All doors are closing. Those outside will be forsaken in the coming transformation. You see," Landry smiled, "it's already beginning. The 7 churches are synchronized. The 7 doors are opening." The objects in the cage behind me began to vibrate, emitting a low hum that seemed to counterpoint the electronic alerts. "Father Vincent will be disappointed you won't attend his sermon," Landry continued, drawing his service weapon. "But perhaps your absence is necessary. Balance, you understand. 7 objects, 7 churches, 7 sacrifices." I finished, the realization dawning. That's what Marie Laveau did. She used these objects to close the doors, but it required blood. Landry inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Precisely. The Voodoo Queen cheated the congregants of their harvest. A temporary setback. And now you need us as sacrifices to keep the doors open," Baptiste said, her voice steady despite the blood trickling down her face. "Just you, Officer Baptiste. Your bloodline makes you particularly valuable." Landry turned his gaze to me. "Ms. Thibodeau, however, has another role to play." The stained glass reflection in his eyes intensified, fractal patterns spreading across his skin like those I'd seen on Dr. Winters. The transformation was beginning. "You will witness," he said, his voice now layered with other tones. "You will record. You will spread the word of the congregants' arrival." Baptiste caught my eye, a silent message passing between us. She tensed, preparing to move. The precinct's ancient PA system crackled to life, emitting not an alert but a voice, familiar yet distorted. "The service is corrupted. The doors swing both ways. The guardians must stand ready." It was Dr. Winter's voice, but with the same harmonic quality as Landry's. Landry's expression flickered with uncertainty. "Impossible. Elijah Winters has been claimed." In that moment of distraction, Baptiste moved with explosive force, driving her shoulder into Landry's midsection despite her cuffed hands. They crashed into a shelf, evidence boxes raining down. Landry's gun clattered across the floor. "The keys!" Baptiste shouted. "Get the cage open." I scrambled for Landry's fallen key ring, frantically trying keys in the padlocks as Baptiste and Landry struggled on the floor. The objects inside hummed louder, the black liquid in the vial now swirling violently. Above us, the PA system continued, Dr. Winter's voice merging with others. "The false shepherd leads his flock to slaughter. The guardian bloodline must be preserved. Find Father Paul. Break the stained glass." The final padlock fell away. I swung the cage door open just as a gunshot echoed through the evidence room. I turned to see Baptiste slumped against a shelf, her uniform blossoming red. Landry stood over her, holding a backup weapon, his face now a mosaic of stained glass patterns. "Too late," he said, turning the gun toward me. "The doors are open. The congregants are here." Through the doorway behind him, I could see figures approaching, officers moving with perfect synchronization, their eyes glowing with colored light. The clock on the wall read 12 o'clock exactly. The final service had begun. Journal entry number 8, Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel. Time fractured in that moment. Landry's gun aimed at my chest, Baptiste bleeding against the evidence shelves, and the synchronized officers approaching from the hallway. The 7 artifacts hummed with increasing intensity behind me, their vibrations seeming to ripple through the floor itself. I grabbed the bone knife and copper disc without thinking, some instinct guiding my hand. As Landry squeezed the trigger, the disc grew hot in my palm, and the bullet, impossibly, curved in midair, embedding itself in the concrete wall. Landry's stained glass eyes widened. "The artifacts respond to you. Interesting." The floor beneath us trembled. The carved symbol began to glow with a faint blue light, spreading outward in concentric circles. Cracks appeared in the concrete, webbing outward from the symbol. "She's bleeding on the sigil," Landry said, his voice shifting between his own and something ancient and harmonically complex. "The Guardian's blood. You've triggered the failsafe." Baptiste, still conscious despite her wound, dragged herself fully onto the symbol, smearing her blood deliberately across the carved lines. Her eyes met mine with fierce determination. "Take everything," she gasped. "Run." The floor groaned and suddenly gave way beneath us. I had just enough time to grab the remaining artifacts and lunge toward Baptiste before we were falling through darkness, concrete and earth crumbling around us. Landry's shocked face disappeared above as the ceiling collapsed between us. We landed hard on packed earth, perhaps 15 feet below the evidence room. Baptiste cried out in pain as we hit, the fall aggravating her gunshot wound. Dust and debris rained down, forcing us to crawl away from the impact zone. When the dust settled, I found we were in a crude tunnel, brick-lined and ancient, stretching away into darkness in both directions. The only light came from the 7 artifacts, which now glowed with an inner luminescence, casting strange shadows on the tunnel walls. "What is this place?" I coughed, helping Baptiste to a sitting position against the wall. "Old smuggling tunnel," she managed through gritted teeth. "French quarters full of them. Prohibitionera." She pressed a hand to her side, blood seeping between her fingers. "Some go back to the Civil War. Even earlier." I tore strips from my shirt to bandage her wound. "How bad is it?" "Through and through. Missed anything vital," she hissed as I tightened the makeshift bandage. "I'll live if we get out of here." Above us, muffled voices and the sound of shifting debris suggested Landry and his officers were trying to find a way down. "We need to move," I said, gathering the artifacts. The small leather book had fallen open, revealing pages written in the same hand as Marie Laveau's journal, but in a script I couldn't decipher. The vial of black liquid seemed to move with purpose now, the substance inside pressing against the glass as if seeking escape. Baptiste nodded toward one direction of the tunnel. "That way should lead toward the river." "The other way." She glanced at the opposite darkness. "Cathedral." The choice seemed obvious. We began moving away from the cathedral, Baptiste leaning heavily on me, the artifacts lighting our way with their eerie glow. The tunnel was damp and smelled of mildew and the distinctive petrichor of the Mississippi, growing stronger as we progressed. We had gone perhaps 200 yards when Baptiste stopped suddenly. "Listen." From ahead came the soft sound of water dripping, and beneath that, something else. A whispered litany, not in English or French but something older, with consonants that seemed to catch and snag in the speaker's throat. The artifacts in my arms pulsed brighter, resonating with the strange words. "Someone's down here," Baptiste whispered, drawing her backup weapon from an ankle holster I hadn't noticed. We crept forward cautiously until the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. What I saw there stopped me cold. The chamber was a perfect octagon, its walls lined with crumbling brick. In the center stood a stone altar, ancient and worn smooth by time. Kneeling before it was a figure in tattered priestly vestments, head bowed in prayer. As if sensing our presence, the figure slowly rose and turned. I recognized him immediately from the cathedral video records. Father Paul, the young priest who had disappeared after warning about Father Vincent. But he was changed. His once youthful face was gaunt and aged, eyes haunted by something beyond normal horror. Around his neck hung a crucifix that seemed to bend in impossible ways, its angles shifting when viewed directly. "The guardian brings the keys," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "And the witness carries the story. You're late. The final service has begun." Baptiste tensed beside me. "How do we know you're really Father Paul?" "Not one of them." A smile ghosted across his lips. "A reasonable question. The congregants cannot speak their own true name. It binds them to their dimension." He spoke a word then, a sound that made my ears pop and the artifacts in my arms vibrate wildly. "Satisfied?" he asked. Baptiste lowered her weapon slightly. "Dr. Winters told us to find you. Said you know the hidden ways." "Elijah Winters." Father Paul's expression darkened. "He's been taken, but not completely. Part of him still fights." "We heard his voice on the PA system," I confirmed. Father Paul gestured toward the altar. "Place the artifacts there. Quickly. We have little time." I hesitated, still unsure if we could trust him. "What are these things? How do they stop the congregants?" "They don't stop them," Father Paul replied. "Nothing can. They've existed alongside our reality since before humans walked upright. What Marie Laveau discovered was a way to close the doors between dimensions. Temporarily. Using these objects," I said, looking down at the artifacts still cradled in my arms. "Using these anchors," he corrected. "Physical manifestations of concepts the congregants cannot comprehend. Free will, sacrifice, faith freely given rather than coerced. Concepts that repel them." A tremor ran through the chamber, dust sifting down from the ceiling. In the distance came the sound of chanting, hundreds of voices speaking in perfect unison. The words incomprehensible but the cadence unmistakable. A church service but wrong. "The resonance is building," Father Paul said urgently. "The 7 churches are synchronized. New Orleans itself is becoming a door." I placed the artifacts on the altar, arranging them in the pattern shown in Marie Laveau's journal. As the final piece, the vial of black liquid, touched the stone, all 7 objects flared with blinding light. When my vision cleared, they had changed, transforming into 7 identical keys of a metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. 7 keys for 7 doors, Father Paul murmured. "The question is, do we lock them or unlock them?" Baptiste, who had slumped against the wall, looked up sharply. "Lock them, obviously. Keep the congregants out." Father Paul shook his head. "It's not that simple. The doors swing both ways, Officer Baptiste. Your ancestor knew this." Marie Laveau understood. He turned to me. "Ms. Thibodeau, what did Dr. Winters tell you about the archives?" "That they contain records of the congregants' previous cycles," I recalled. "That they've been monitoring them for centuries." "And why do you think that is?" Father Paul pressed. "Why study something you can only delay, never defeat?" The realization dawned slowly. Because they're not just a threat. They're also protecting us from something else. Father Paul nodded grimly. Beyond our reality, beyond even the congregants' dimension, there are entities that make the congregants seem benevolent by comparison. Vast, hungry consciousnesses that would consume our reality entirely. Another tremor, stronger this time. Brick dust showered from the ceiling. "The congregants feed on us, yes?" Father Paul continued. "They harvest human energy, human time, but they do so sustainably, like farmers tending crops. What waits beyond them would devour everything in an instant. So we're choosing between parasites and predators, Baptiste said bitterly. We're choosing the nature of the door, Father Paul corrected. For 60 years, it's been locked from both sides. Now it's opening, and we must decide, do we force it shut again, or do we control how it opens? My phone buzzed. Impossible this far underground, unless the message was coming from somewhere else entirely. Emergency alert. Dimensional breach imminent. All realities converging. The harvest or the devouring. Choose. The same message appeared on Baptiste's phone, and then, impossibly, on the brick wall itself, the letters glowing with the same light as the keys. They're giving us a choice? I asked incredulously. Not them, Father Paul said. This message comes from the Threshold Guardians, humans like Dr. Winters who've been altered to serve at the boundaries. Neither fully human nor fully congregant. Another tremor, violent enough to send loose bricks tumbling from the walls. The chanting grew louder, closer. We're out of time, Father Paul said. The final service reaches its climax. The resonance between the 7 churches has reached critical mass. A section of wall collapsed, revealing another tunnel newer, its concrete walls inscribed with symbols similar to those in Marie Laveau's journal. Through it stumbled a figure I recognized despite his transformation. Dr. Winters, his body now a mosaic of stained glass patterns, light shining from within. The archives are compromised, he said, his voice layered with harmonics. Father Vincent comes. He brings the congregants through fully. And what waits behind them? Father Paul asked. Dr. Winters' fractured face shifted in what might have been fear. Hunger. Endless hunger. Baptiste pushed herself upright, her determined eyes meeting mine. We need to control the door. Not close it, not open it fully. The Guardian speaks wisdom, Dr. Winters said, but it requires blood. The keys must be placed by one of the bloodline. Baptiste nodded grimly. My family has served as guardians for generations. I understand what I have to do. She took 3 of the keys from the altar, their darkness seeming to flow up her arms like liquid shadow. Maya, you'll take the rest. We'll need to split up. 3 churches for me, 4 for you. I can't do this alone, I protested. You won't be, Father Paul said, removing his clerical collar. I'll accompany you. Dr. Winters will go with Officer Baptiste. Dr. Winters' kaleidoscope eyes fixed on me. The witness must record. When this is done, someone must remember, must tell the story, whether we succeed or fail. From the tunnel we'd originally followed came sounds of pursuit, footsteps and the methodical tap of Landry's measured stride. They've found us, Baptiste said, checking her weapon. We need to go. Now. Father Paul moved to the far wall and pressed a specific brick. A section of wall swung inward, revealing yet another passage. This way leads to the crypt beneath St. Augustine. We can access the other churches through the old cemetery tunnels. As we prepared to separate, Baptiste grabbed my arm with surprising strength. If I don't make it, you will, I insisted. If I don't, she repeated firmly. Find my aunt. Tell her Desiree remembered the family oath. She pressed something into my hand, a small key on a worn leather cord. For my safety deposit box. Everything I've learned about the churches is there. I nodded, throat tight with emotion. As we stepped into separate tunnels, the chamber behind us collapsed in a deafening roar. The final service had reached its crescendo, and New Orleans trembled on the threshold between realities. The 7 keys burned cold in our hands as we raced against time through the hidden passages beneath a city that was fast becoming something else entirely. Journal entry number 9, Maya Thibodeau, New Orleans Sentinel. The crypt beneath St. Augustine Church smelled of ancient dust and something else. A metallic tang that reminded me of blood and ozone. Father Paul led me through narrow passages where burial niches lined the walls, their occupants long since removed, but their names still visible on tarnished plaques. The 4 obsidian keys felt impossibly heavy in my pocket, each seeming to pull in a different direction. "We need to hurry," Father Paul whispered, his voice echoing strangely. "The alignment peaks at midnight." My phone buzzed again with an emergency alert that shouldn't have reached us this far underground. "Emergency alert. Time distortion event in progress. Seek shelter in designated sacred spaces. Do not attempt to leave once inside. They're herding people into the churches," I realized with horror. "Using the emergency system to deliver more worshippers." Father Paul nodded grimly. "The congregants need to reach critical mass, a certain number of human minds focused on them simultaneously. The emergency system gives them that reach." We emerged into the main church through a hidden door behind the altar. St. Augustine was empty but illuminated by hundreds of candles that shouldn't have been there. No one had been allowed inside for days according to the police barricades outside. "Who lit these?" I whispered. "Time is flexible near the thresholds," Father Paul explained. "What you're seeing might have happened yesterday, or might happen tomorrow." As if confirming his words, the church bells began to toll, though the clock on the wall showed only 10:17 p.m. "Midnight somewhere," Father Paul muttered. "The first threshold is aligning." A series of tremors shook the building, plaster dust raining from the ceiling. Through the stained glass windows, I could see strange lights illuminating the sky above New Orleans. Colors that shouldn't exist, moving in patterns that hurt to watch. My phone buzzed again. "Emergency alert. Reality breach containment protocol initiated. Remain in prayer. Salvation through devotion." "That's not from the city," Father Paul said, examining my screen. "The congregants are taking control of the emergency system completely now." I took out one of the keys. "Where does this go?" Father Paul pointed to the tabernacle behind the altar. "The door isn't visible to normal perception. You need to." His words cut off as his body suddenly jerked backward, as if pulled by invisible strings. His mouth opened in a silent scream as his skin began to ripple, patches turning translucent like stained glass. "They've found me," he gasped, fighting whatever was happening to him. "I've been touched too many times by them. They can pull me across now. What do I do?" I asked desperately. "For keys, for churches," he managed through gritted teeth. "The locks are behind the altars. Baptiste must reach the others." "And then what?" "Turn counterclockwise to control the opening, clockwise to seal completely." Another violent tremor rocked the church. A deep fissure opened in the marble floor, stretching from the entrance to the altar. From it rose the smell of incense and something else, old pennies and salt water. "Which way do I turn it?" I demanded. "Control or seal?" Father Paul's eyes rolled back, showing only white. When he spoke again, his voice held that same harmonic complexity I'd heard from Landry and Dr. Winters. "The witness chooses," he said, no longer sounding entirely human. "Record the choice. Tell the story." His body contorted one final time before collapsing limply to the floor. For a terrible moment I thought he was dead, until his chest rose with a shallow breath. Unconscious but alive. I was alone now. I approached the tabernacle cautiously, key in hand. The ornate golden box where the Eucharist was traditionally kept seemed to shimmer, its edges blurring as if seen through heat waves. When I touched it, my fingers passed through the metal as if it were smoke, revealing a keyhole that shouldn't exist. Outside, sirens wailed across the city, their pitch distorted and wrong. Through the windows, I could see people moving toward the church, walking with the too perfect synchronization I'd observed in the security footage, their shadows stretching impossibly long behind them despite the absence of light sources. The congregants were coming. I inserted the key into the hidden lock. It turned smoothly in both directions, stopping at points that felt significant, like tuning a radio to find a clear signal. Clockwise would seal the threshold completely. Counterclockwise would establish a controlled opening, a controlled symbiosis with entities that fed on human time and energy, or total separation with whatever consequences that might bring. My phone buzzed once more. Emergency alert. Threshold guardians compromised. Baptiste down. 3 churches secured. Awaiting final decision. My heart sank. Baptiste was hurt, possibly worse, but she'd managed to place her keys. The message said 3 churches were secured, which meant she'd made it to all her targets. Another alert followed immediately. Office of Temporal Integrity. Ms. Thibodeau, this is Dr. Winters. What you're experiencing is a simulation. The artifacts are manipulating your perception. Seal the thresholds completely. And then an OPD emergency broadcast. Maya, don't listen. This is Baptiste. Remember what Father Paul said about the greater threat. Partial opening is our only chance. I had no way to verify either message. Both could be manipulations. Through the church windows, I could now see all of New Orleans transformed. Buildings twisted into impossible geometries. The sky had become a kaleidoscope of colors that strobed and pulsed. Time itself seemed to stutter, movements outside occurring in stop-motion jerks. From the entrance of the church came a sound I recognized, the measured tap of Landry's walking stick. The doors swung open, revealing the police captain, now fully transformed. His body was a mosaic of stained glass and shadow, light pouring from within. Behind him stood rows of officers and civilians, their eyes uniformly blank, moving in perfect unison. "The witness will choose," Landry said, his voice reverberating through the church like an organ. "The door stands ready. The final service begins." The congregants began to sing, a hymn I recognized but with words I didn't understand, the melody twisting in on itself in fractal patterns. I had seconds to decide. The key turned cold in my hand as I made my choice, twisting it firmly as the congregants surged forward and reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The 7th bell tolled midnight as the last threshold responded to my touch, and New Orleans trembled on the edge of transformation. Final recording, Maya Thibodeau, frequency unknown. I made my choice. As Landry and his congregation of stained glass people surged toward me, I turned the key counterclockwise. Partial opening, controlled symbiosis. The decision wasn't made from certainty but from the terrible weight of choosing between 2 unknowns. The tabernacle shuddered and collapsed into dust. Where it had stood, a door materialized, not physical, but a rippling tear in reality itself, edges defined by light that somehow absorbed rather than emitted. The key melted in my grip, its obsidian substance flowing up my arm like liquid shadow, burning cold patterns into my skin that resembled the symbols from Marie Laveau's journal. The church bells ceased their tolling mid-ring. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of sound so complete it felt physical. Then came the whisper, "The witness has chosen. The covenant is renewed." The voice belonged to every congregant simultaneously, a perfect harmony of countless throats speaking as one. The advancing crowd stopped in unison, their stained glass bodies freezing in mid-motion. Landry alone continued forward, each step punctuated by the tap of his cane on marble that now rippled like water. "Do you understand what you've done, Ms. Thibodeau?" "I chose compromise," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Controlled opening instead of sealed doors. Landry's kaleidoscope face shifted in what might have been amusement. "You've chosen to perpetuate a cycle that has existed for centuries. Neither victory nor defeat. Continuation." The floor beneath us trembled. The tear behind the altar pulsed, expanding slightly before contracting again, like a heart beating. Through it, I glimpsed something vast and geometric, folding in on itself endlessly. A cathedral of impossible architecture that seemed both infinitely large and impossibly distant. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Landry said, his voice resonating with harmonic overtones. "The terms of the covenant must be established. The congregants will continue to gather human time and consciousness, but within limits. 7 churches, 7 days each year. No more. And the other things, what waits behind your realm, will remain contained, as they have been since the first covenant." He gestured toward the congregation behind him. These worshippers will return to their lives with no memory of their service, carrying only dreams and lost hours. My phone buzzed one final time. Emergency alert. Covenant terms accepted. The witness will observe. The guardian will enforce. The temporal harvest will proceed within established parameters. As if summoned by the message, the rear doors of the church opened. Baptiste limped in, supported by Dr. Winters. Her face was ashen from blood loss, but her eyes were clear and alert. Dr. Winters' transformation had stabilized. His skin still held traces of stained glass, but he appeared largely human again. "You did it," Baptiste said, relief evident in her voice. "The other churches have stabilized. The breaches are controlled." Dr. Winters nodded. "The office acknowledges your decision, Ms. Thibodeau. While not the choice we might have recommended, it maintains the balance that has preserved New Orleans for centuries." "What about Father Paul?" I asked, looking to where he still lay unconscious near the altar. "He exists between states now," Dr. Winters explained. "Neither fully here nor fully there. He'll serve as an anchor for the covenant, a living threshold." As if responding to his name, Father Paul's body rose slowly into the air, hovering several feet above the floor. His limbs arranged themselves into a posture of perpetual prayer, suspended before the tear in reality. His eyes opened, but they no longer saw our world. They reflected the impossible cathedral glimpsed through the breach. "And what about me?" I asked, aware of the obsidian patterns still spreading across my skin. What did the alert mean by "the witness will observe"? Landry and Dr. Winters exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. "The covenant requires balance," Dr. Winters said carefully. "A human consciousness to record, to remember, to maintain the story. Someone who exists partially in both realms," Landry added. "Time moves differently for the congregants. What is a year to us is a moment to them." Understanding dawned with horrific clarity. I'm to be trapped between worlds, recording what happens. "Not trapped," Baptiste interjected fiercely. "The witness maintains free will. That's essential to the covenant. You'll move between realms, 7 days here, 7 there, maintaining the balance." The obsidian patterns had now reached my face. I could feel them crawling across my cheeks, circling my eyes. My perception was already changing. I could see auras of time around everyone in the church, seconds and minutes visible as colored halos. "I never agreed to this," I whispered. "You turned the key," Landry said simply. "The artifacts responded to you. They chose you as witness long before you chose your path." Outside the church windows, New Orleans was slowly returning to normal. The impossible colors faded from the sky. Buildings straightened themselves. Time resumed its linear flow. The congregation behind Landry began to disperse, moving backward through the doors with that same perfect synchronization, their stained glass appearance gradually fading as they returned to human form. Dr. Winters approached me, his expression somber. "There have always been witnesses, Miss Thibodeau. Marie Laveau was one. Before her, others. The role is not without compensations." "What compensations could possibly balance this?" I demanded. "Knowledge," he said simply. "Understanding of realities beyond human comprehension. And time. More of it than you can imagine." Baptiste limped to my side, pressing something into my hand. A small journal bound in leather, its pages blank. "To record what you see, what you learn, for those who come after." The tear behind the altar pulsed again, wider this time. Through it came a sound, a sermon in a language that hurt to hear, yet somehow I understood perfectly. It spoke of cycles and harvests, of symbiosis and containment, of hunger kept at bay through careful feeding. The obsidian patterns completed their spread across my body. My perception split, 1 foot in the world I knew, 1 in the cathedral dimension where the congregants gathered in their true forms. 7 days, Baptiste promised, squeezing my hand. "Then you return. I'll be waiting." The guardian watches for the witness. Tell my editor I'm on extended assignment, I said, attempting humor despite the transformation overtaking me. Landry stepped back, tapping his cane 3 times on the floor. Each impact resonated through both realities. The covenant is sealed. The service begins. I was pulled toward the tear, not against my will but not entirely with it either. As I crossed the threshold, I looked back one last time at the world I knew. Baptiste raised her hand in farewell. Dr. Winters bowed his head in acknowledgement. Father Paul, suspended in his eternal prayer, shed a single tear that crystallized into stained glass before it hit the floor. The last thing I saw as the tear closed behind me was my own reflection in the church windows. My eyes now kaleidoscopes of light, my skin a canvas of obsidian symbols that told a story I was only beginning to understand. Here in the cathedral dimension, time moves differently. What feels like months has passed in what I know to be minutes in my world. I've learned to send messages back, to thread my consciousness through the emergency alert system, to whisper warnings and truths to those with ears to hear. 7 days will come. I will return to New Orleans, to Baptiste, to my life, changed but still myself. Then 7 days will pass again, and I'll return to this place of impossible geometry and ancient hunger. The witness observes, the guardian protects, the covenant endures, and somewhere beyond the congregant's realm, something vast and hungry presses against the thinning barriers, testing the strength of our fragile arrangement. I record these words as testament, as warning, as beacon. If you receive this message, know that the churches in New Orleans require both attendance and absence, worship and skepticism, faith and doubt. If you receive an emergency alert about extended services, read between the lines. I'll be watching, I'll be waiting, I'll be witnessing. Emergency alert. This concludes the current broadcast. Normal services will resume in 7 days. The witness remains. The guardian stands. The congregation gathers. Time is the only offering required.